Welcome to Crossroads. There is a debate right now of whether totalitarianism is seeping into Hong Kong after the CCP's takeover. Now, the United Kingdom is having a war of words with the Chinese Communist Party. It's raising questions over whether Hong Kong has truly lost its freedom, the one it used to enjoy because the CCP did a hostile takeover, essentially. The Chinese Communist Party recently prosecuted 14 political dissidents in Hong Kong, which used to be, of course, under Western-style rule and enjoyed some elements of democracy, including a British legal system. But after the CCP broke its agreement with the United Kingdom and its hostile takeover of Hong Kong, questions are now growing over whether Hong Kong is finding itself under some of the exact totalitarian policies that the Chinese Communist Party employs not only in mainland China, but even in more totalitarian controlled areas, such as in Xinjiang or East Turkestan or in Tibet. Now, currently what's happening is this. This was brought into the spotlight by comments made by Lord Jonathan Sumpton, a UK judge who resigned just last week from Hong Kong's highest court, the Court of Final Appeal. And watch this.
The national security law itself and a distinct colonial law against sedition, which are extremely illiberal. The problem that under the basic law, if China doesn't like the court's decisions, they can reverse them by what is called an interpretation. It was initially unclear how frequently this would be used, but recent incidents have indicated that the Chinese are determined to use this provision in order to ensure that its opponents lose.
Now, on this, The Guardian had more to say on Lord Sumpton, and here's what they said. He said that the real problem, I think, is Hong Kong, is the paranoid atmosphere there. This is, of course, Lord Sumpton saying to BBC Radio's For Today program. And he added, this is to be the response to the 2019 riots. But there were already laws perfectly capable of dealing with those. The object has become increasingly clear of the national security law was to crush peaceful political dissent, not just riots. He's referring, of course, to the CCP's new national security law, which is not really about normal national security. It's about defending the Chinese Communist Party against any kind of criticism or any kind of dissent. Now, he continues noting that China was increasingly intervening in legal decisions in the territory because, again, he had a legal role in Hong Kong, and he's suggesting the CCP is interfering with the legal system in Hong Kong more directly. And notes further in that at the end of May, 14 pro-democracy activists were found guilty of subversion in the largest application of national security law to date. They included the former lawmakers Luang Kwong Huang and Helena Wang, the journalist turned campaigner Gwyneth Ho, and others who joined the mass protests of 2019. You might remember back in 2019, people of Hong Kong were protesting against the Chinese Communist Party because the Chinese Communist Party was trying to end, and did eventually end, the one-party, two-systems agreement. Essentially, when UK handed over ownership to this Chinese Communist Party of Hong Kong, because it was, again, a British colony, they had certain agreements in place to maintain a certain amount of rule of law, to maintain a British legal system, to maintain some semblance of democracy, and so on. The Chinese Communist Party got rid of that. They violated the agreement and took over Hong Kong. People protested, and what's happening now is that people involved with that are still facing charges. Now, Lord Sumpton said that I think that the picture is getting darker. The judgment on the 30th of May against the 14 democracy activists was a major indication of the lengths to which some judges are prepared to go to ensure that Beijing's campaign against those who have supported democracy succeeds. Now, again, remember what happened back in 2019. People of Hong Kong, of course, were standing up against the CCP. The Chinese Communist Party eventually did bring a forceful end to the values that Hong Kong used to represent, and Hong Kong became just another normal part of the Chinese Communist Party. Well, things have only gotten worse since then for the people in Hong Kong, and the Western world is actually taking notice. The new national security law, which is becoming the focus not just here but actually in other areas as well, is just the latest move the Chinese Communist Party has rolled out as a new form of social control. You might remember we talked about this recently. The CCP is rolling out all kinds of new systems to get rid of what they believe are elements of social instability. any individual who questions the Chinese Communist Party, any individual who would even try to investigate, for example, the true numbers of the Chinese economy, any person who would criticize the CCP, who would doubt the CCP, who would even listen to opinions against the Chinese Communist Party, can now be found guilty of serious crimes under this law. And as the CCP does that, as we recently discussed, it's also creating military units within corporations. It's creating nationwide spy programs, making it so that every Chinese citizen is encouraged to spy on and report every other Chinese citizen. And even in schools, they're now implementing different types of military training, or at least trying to. Now, it's essentially back to this national security law. It's a vague set of laws that lets the regime go after basically anybody who they deem to be a threat against the Chinese Communist Party. Many people have noted the very vague definitions of crimes, and because it's vague, it means that they can overinterpret it. Any sign of not following the CCP, of questioning the CCP, and so on, anything of that sort can now be gone after as if it were a crime. Now, in recent response to the recent case in Hong Kong, the U.S. State Department placed visa restrictions on Chinese officials who were involved in that case. But we'll be talking more about this after we come back from a quick break.
Experts agree, one of the best ways to protect against financial uncertainty is to diversify your portfolio. Learn how physical gold and silver can secure your retirement funds from today's economic challenges. With a gold IRA from American Hartford Gold, you can safeguard your wealth with no penalties or taxes when you transfer your current qualifying retirement accounts. Call now and our precious metals specialists will send you a free information kit, no cost or obligation. American Hartford Gold, a trusted industry leader with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau, has a 5-star rating from thousands of happy clients. Whether you are getting physical precious metals in a gold IRA or delivered to your doorstep, we offer only the highest quality gold and silver. For your peace of mind, we also offer a no-fee buyback commitment, a low-price guarantee, along with free shipping and free insurance. So don't wait. Call the number on your screen today and secure your financial future.
Welcome back. The U.S. State Department is placing some visa restrictions on both Hong Kong officials and officials in mainland China. Now, 14 political dissidents in Hong Kong were recently convicted by Chinese Communist Party authorities for subversion, as they call it. And this comes again in the wake of recent CCP suppressions in Hong Kong about discussions on the history of the Tiananmen Square massacre. Now, in response to this case in Hong Kong, the U.S. State Department is taking notice. They actually placed visa restrictions on Chinese officials who were involved in the case. This is a statement made by a State Department spokesperson. And again, this is from the U.S. Consul General in Hong Kong. They said, quote, "The United States is deeply concerned by the guilty verdict's announcement in the national security law trial of pro-democracy organizers in Hong Kong. They say the defendants were subjected to a politically motivated prosecution and jailed simply for peacefully participating in political activities protected under the Basic Law of Hong Kong. In response, the Department of State is taking steps to impose new visa restrictions on PRC, People's Republic of China, again the CCP system, and Hong Kong officials responsible for implementing the national security law." And further, when they state that we urge the PRC government and Hong Kong authorities to uphold Hong Kong's judicial independence, cease the use of vague national security laws to curb peaceful dissent, and restore the openness that was so crucial to Hong Kong's vitality and competitiveness as an international business hub. Again, briefly on that, remember what made Hong Kong unique from the rest of China was because the CCP, although they technically controlled it after it was handed over to them by the British, because it used to be a British colony, they did have the British legal system. And the British legal system, it has checks and balances, has different elements to it to ensure that there's no political involvement in the prosecutions and so on. The Chinese Communist Party has kept the skin of that, the illusion of it. But the judges in the cases are noting problems. They're noting the CCP is directly overriding some of this, interfering with it, and undermining it. And that's the issue. Now, the Chinese Communist Party lashed out at the reactions from Western officials, and it called the content biased and even urged the European Union itself to stop interfering in Hong Kong affairs. A fancy way of saying, don't criticize the CCP when it abuses the Chinese people, is what they're saying. But the Chinese Communist Party criticizing other countries for paying attention to its human rights abuses is not actually helping the Chinese Communist Party. In fact, it's making the CCP look even worse in some regards, and there's actually, because of that, a growing pushback against the regime over its policies in Hong Kong. Again, Hong Kong is becoming an international focus yet again because of this. The Epoch Times reported that Stephen Roach, the former chairman of Morgan Stanley Asia, reiterated that Hong Kong is over, and that's his stance, and he said this during a Foreign Correspondents Club lunch in Hong Kong on June 5th. Mr. Roach cited three main reasons on why Hong Kong is over. He said, 1, the fundamental weakening of Hong Kong's basic economic foundation; 2, the unresolved U.S.-China conflict; and 3, the reduced political autonomy of Hong Kong since 2019. In other words, Hong Kong is no longer autonomous. It is now controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. And notes that he believes that Hong Kong's economy is tightly linked to mainland China's, and that without a rebound in the Chinese economy, Hong Kong cannot recover on its own. Now remember, historically, before the CCP's takeover of Hong Kong was kind of the economic hub of China. The Chinese Communist Party, they had some uses for it. They used it to get around sanctions, they used it to get around trade disputes, because Hong Kong, even though it was part of mainland China, was regarded as kind of legally different, right? They had the one country, two systems. One China, but two separate governments and forms of government, right? China, under the Chinese Communist Party, is ruled by a communist government, which has a socialist system. Hong Kong was ruled by a democratic government, although still technically controlled by the CCP to an extent. But they had a relatively democratic system with a British legal system. That was the one country, two systems. After 2019, the CCP ended that. And because they ended it, the line that economically separated Hong Kong from the policies of mainland China also disappeared. And that meant, of course, that the Hong Kong authorities and so on, they lost a lot of their special trade deals, a lot of the things that let them bypass, international laws that might have applied to mainland China. And because of that, again, they went from being one of the world's economic hubs to just being another part of mainland China. Now, this is also making some waves in the Hong Kong legal system as well. The Epoch Times reported that human rights advocates are urging all remaining foreign judges in Hong Kong to resign from the city's highest court in a bid to reject the Chinese regime's suppression of civil liberties. Because remember, Lord Sumpton, the individual we talked about earlier, the former judge who was criticizing this, he stepped down, he noted the problems, and left the scene. And now there's pressure against all the remaining judges to also leave. And the reasoning for it is this. These judges, although they do represent Western legal systems, checks and balances, the assurance that maybe the government is not directly interfering with the cases, they have that appearance and they serve that use. But because the CCP is already undermining that, because the CCP is already violating that, their presence only serves as a kind of illusion, a trick that Hong Kong has a system of maybe civil liberties that it does not actually have. And so there's pressure to make them step down, because why serve a propaganda role if it does not actually represent what it's supposed to represent? Now, the Epoch Times notes that 3 foreign judges recently resigned from Hong Kong's Court of Final Appeal. Canada's former Chief Justice Beverly McCallum, who was 80 years old, announced her resignation from the CFA in a statement on June 10th, citing her age and a desire to spend more time with family as reasons for her departure. The departure of Lords Lawrence Collins and Jonathan Sumpton, what we talked about earlier from the CFA, on May 7th. Those came a week after the city's most recent national security case, in which 14 democracy activists were again convicted of subversion. And there's others as well who might do the same. They might leave. Now, in this, of course, the Chinese Communist Party has totalitarian models, of course, all throughout the country. But a few areas really stand out. Tibet, of course, which used to be, it's kind of an autonomous region. There's Xinjiang, also known as East Turkestan, where you have a lot of the Chinese Muslim population. And there's even parts of Mongolia the Chinese Communist Party controls. And in these regions, the Chinese Communist Party has established additional systems to ensure the CCP's power stays in place. Because Tibet, of course, which mainly practices Tibetan Buddhism, and Tibetan Buddhists, of course, follow the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama fled when the CCP invaded Tibet and did a hostile takeover. And many people have remained loyal to the Dalai Lama and the former system of Tibet and not to the Chinese Communist Party. And because the people of Tibet remain loyal to the previously existing system and not to the Chinese Communist Party, at least not all of them, this has led the CCP to enact extremely suppressive measures in Tibet, even beyond the normal surveillance systems you have elsewhere in China. It's even more severe in Tibet. Same thing in Xinjiang, again, also known as East Turkestan. That region, of course, is mostly Muslim. They practice the Muslim Uyghurs, right? It's a Chinese ethnic group. And these individuals, of course, a lot of them do not support the Chinese Communist Party. Because the CCP has done a hostile takeover very similar to Tibet, the people in Xinjiang or East Turkestan do not recognize the CCP as their legitimate government. At least some of them don't. And because of that, of course, the Chinese Communist Party has enacted also extremely totalitarian methods to suppress and control East Turkestan. This includes, for example, biometric scanning systems. This includes, for example, policies that even allow Chinese police and other individuals to stay in the homes of people. This includes policies that allow checkpoints and searches and the whole 9 yards. Really like East Berlin type, control systems to ensure people can't leave and can't escape and also can't practice their faith to the truest extent. Now, you also find some of this in Mongolia, which does not technically have kind of a religious or cultural separation as strict as maybe Tibet or East Turkestan or Xinjiang. But in those regions as well, because they don't recognize the authority of the CCP as much as the CCP would like, the Chinese Communist Party has also instituted policies to crush them. And in all these areas, you have what's being called, again, not just religious restrictions, but also cultural genocide, the incriminating and destruction of the values that used to exist in these areas. Because the values of these countries, the values of these cultures, are seen in direct opposition to the power of the Chinese Communist Party. And back to the point of Hong Kong, it's a fair question to ask whether these are the similar programs we're now seeing in place in Hong Kong. Now, we could argue that Hong Kong doesn't have maybe a separate religion. We could argue that the Chinese Communist Party maybe recognizes Hong Kong as being more integrated economically. They don't have the image, for example, of pre-CCP governance and pre-CCP systems. They don't have, for example, the lack of modern infrastructure, right? Hong Kong is a very modern city. But of course, what's different in Hong Kong is that they have the Western legal systems, and they want that. They recognize that as the legitimate system. They still recognize Western law as legitimate. They still recognize Western values as legitimate. And if they have really their faith in that alternate system and not in the CCP, well, then they are going to be targeted as they currently are by the same types of totalitarian policies that the Chinese Communist Party uses to suppress other dissident regions. And Hong Kong, it seems, is becoming, in the CCP's eyes, a dissident region. Now, the human rights abuses as well, they're not limited to the 14 dissidents. This is where attention is falling right now, right? This recent prosecution of these 14 individuals, these pro-democracy activists. Because, again, in Tibet you might have pro-Tibetan activists. In Xinjiang you might have pro-Muslim Uyghur activists. In again, Hong Kong, you have pro-democracy activists. And all of these represent a very similar threat to the legitimacy of the Chinese Communist Party. Now, let me show you some stuff. This was from just a few days ago. The Guardian said that 3 people have been arrested for turning their backs and remaining seated when China's national anthem was played prior to Hong Kong's home World Cup qualifier against Iran, police have said. And it's that football spectators in Hong Kong used to boo the Chinese anthem as a show of political discontent. In other words, when they played the Chinese national anthem of the CCP, they would boo from the stands. They would condemn it. And now they can't do that. They note that the government banned the practice in 2020, 1 year after the whole crackdown started. And they note that was part of a wider crackdown after huge democracy protests in the city. They note that at Hong Kong Stadium on Thursday, police said 2 men and a woman were arrested because they, quote, turned their backs towards the pitch and did not stand for the playing of the national anthem. And so even not saying something, even quietly not showing support for the CCP, can get you arrested now in Hong Kong. Now, in another recent case, a court prosecutor was fired after he criticized the Hong Kong police of lying. The Epoch Times notes that William Wong Wah-foon, senior court prosecutor second of the Justice Department there in Hong Kong, who in his internal email accused the police, again in Hong Kong, of, quote, blatant lying during the anti-extradition movement, and who was accused of calling on colleagues to participate in the banned candlelight vigil on June 4th, 2020, was placed under disciplinary inquiry and found guilty of 2 counts of misconduct. In March of this year, 2024 again, he was summarily dismissed from his post and stripped of his pension entitlement by the Civil Service Bureau. And it's that Mr. Wong applied to the High Court on June 6 for judicial review, seeking to overturn the decision. So in Hong Kong, again, if you were part of the democracy protests, you have a target on your back. If you have maintained those positions of supporting democracy, you have a target on your back. If you believe in the Western system of rule of law, of the court system, and even if you criticize CCP authorities of being dishonest or lying, or even if you just quietly protest, you turn your back when they sing the national anthem, you risk going to jail. And that is what it's like in Hong Kong now. But aside from these individual cases, there was also heavy attention on Hong Kong and the suppression of free speech, notably during the recent anniversary of the June 4th Tiananmen Square massacre. Now, I'll be talking more about what the CCP did during the anniversary in the rest of this episode, which will be exclusively on EpochTV.com. So if you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, Rumble, X, join us on Epoch TV by clicking the link in the description below. Watch the rest of the episode. Join us over there. Epoch TV is the uncensored streaming platform of the Epoch Times. And on it, we have a lot of great shows, movies, documentaries, including The Final War, my documentary that exposes the Chinese Communist Party's 100-year plot to defeat America. Now, although it may not be obvious on the surface, the Chinese Communist Party has been waging a long war with the United States using unrestricted warfare tactics, something very important to know about. I expose exactly what the CCP has been doing right here in the United States, again in the Final War documentary. This is a seriously important issue that directly impacts the future of America. You can find out more about the CCP's tactics by watching The Final War. Again, link in the description below, and I'll show you also a quick trailer before we continue the rest of this episode exclusively on Epoch TV.
The greatest threat facing the United States is the CCP.
The Epoch Times investigation team had studied the CCP for years, but what we uncovered was yielding evidence beyond our imagination.
With Chairman Mao, with the Prime Minister, our talks have been characterized by frankness.
The Clinton administration said, oh, don't worry about it. This will be a poison pill for China.
China's strategic goal is to make sure that the U.S. has 4 enemies, and one of them must be a terrorist group.
We are giving of our life's blood so that the Chinese Communist Party can survive and thrive.